Welcome back, MTG Joe here, and we're here for another weekly meta breakdown, this time for the historic format. For those of you new to the video and kind of the channel, what we do is once a week we look at the top performing decks on each MTG Arena format, Standard, Alchemy, and Historic, both best of one and traditional best of three with sideboarding. And really what we're trying to do is kind of look at the trends week to week in terms of what are the best performing decks. And the way we're doing this is by leveraging Untapped GG. It's a companion tool that runs alongside your Arena client, and it lets you track your win rates, collection, suggest decks, has draft tools, and then it aggregates all the data in terms of win rate matrices. It's free to use to get started. The link is in the description, in the video description down below, so you can click that link, install, and get you going right away. You can see, like it says, I own all the cards here as an example. I could copy decks to MTGA, kind of that idea. And we are looking at Historic. This is January 27th up to February 5th. As always, if you do enjoy these videos and want to support the channel, the easiest way to do so, and the freest, drop a like, comment, and if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. We do gameplay content in addition to these weekly meta breakdowns for a variety of formats. So we are looking Platinum to Mythic rank as always, January 27th from when the bans and nerfs took place. As to now, there's no historic bans, but we did see the unbanning of the unnerfed Teferi, as well as the changes to alchemy-based cards. We have a 40,000 game sample size, which is a bit lower. We're usually in the 50s to 60s, but what we're seeing is like a lot of folks are deviating to Standard this week, based on just the bans and kind of that format being a little bit more refreshed. So best of one, top performing deck of the week, once again, is captured by Selesnya Company, the green-white life gain deck. So basically it's a life gain kind of value deck with like a bunch of when creatures enter the battlefield gain life. You can make really big Voice of the Blessed or Trelasarra, and it does have the combo element of the deck where if you have Heliod, Scurry Oak, and any of that enters the battlefield creature life gain dudes, you basically gain a life, put a counter on Scurry Oak with Heliod. Scurry Oak triggers, creates a token, gains you a life, loop infinite life, or as fast as you can click, infinitely large creature, infinitely wide, or abstractly large. Notably, the only difference that we're seeing in this particular list from week to week is the change of, instead of going with 4 Skyclave Apparition, and it looks like they trimmed down on a land, they're opting to go with 3 Inquisitor Captains as basically collected companies 5 through 7 to find combo pieces. So a little bit less interaction, but more kind of linear combo elements. The one thing this does make it a little weak to is like this next deck we're looking at, the mono red aggro decks that play Roiling Vortex or Rampaging Ferocidon. Having less copies of Skyclave Apparition makes it harder to hit. Notably as well with Inquisitor Captain, it was nerfed. It is no longer when it enters the battlefield only, so you can't copy it with, you can't chain multiple Glasspool Mimic or copy effects. You can if the Glasspool, it's on cast trigger now. You can if you cast a Glasspool Mimic from your hand and copy, because that counts as casting. But if you find a Glasspool Mimic with Inquisitor Captain, it no longer lets you kind of chain together multiple copies. So kind of the Bant Blink deck is kind of gone away now. We see mono red aggro. We have a couple different versions. I do have my version that's going to show up a little bit lower. This last week, like we're still seeing win rates in like the high 50s. I felt this last week going into the end of season and early this month that mono red hasn't been greatly performing. It might have just been bad variants. Like I was missing land drops a lot, but I just felt like we were seeing an influx of control decks as well as just more food style decks, which the Golgari food is probably the hardest matchup. Just the incidental life gain, stuff like that. Niv's usually pretty easy. Blue-white control, for the most part, is pretty easy, but I've been noticing some of the versions now are going Divine Purge over Wrath of God, and having a turn 3 sweeper is a lot worse, I'm finding. This version here, notably, is on the Torbran with Goblin Chainwhirler, deals 3 damage to each creature, a little bit higher creature density. You'll also see like this version is a bit more of a dated version with the Annex Fanatical Firebrand's where you're going to want to be on instead of the Fervent Champion. And the reason being, although this has first strike and kind of scales better with multiple copies, the Firebrand allows you to have a turn 1 answer in terms of a sack to kill any of these life gain ones to stop the turn 2. So the thing is, if they're on the play and they go turn 1 Soul Warden and then turn 2 Trelasarra or Voice of the Blessed, then you lose your opportunity to stomp. This allows you to have an answer on 1. It also lets you pair up with something like Stomp to be able to deal 3 damage to a creature for something like Arcanist on turn 2 as well. So that's kind of the preferred creature. You're also seeing like copies of Runaway Steamkin. You can't really be going this duration. Like the Embercleave version's kind of phased out at this point. This also has like no clear answers. Like Ferocidon's so good in the meta right now that you can't really be just relying only on Roiling Vortex and then always keeping a land up each turn. So I would either say play this version of mono red. This is my version. We'll go up to blue white in a sec, but my notable difference, I don't like Torbran in the list. While it does allow you in the mirrors to kind of have a breaker card, it does rely on you having an established board state, and 4 mana that when it enters the battlefield doesn't do anything and just be killed isn't the greatest. I like Static Discharge. It's just more reach. It gives you more burn. Lets you play around. So if they go Sarah's Emissary and name creature, you still have Enchantment, Planeswalker, and Sorcery was ways to deal damage outside of the Stomp breaking that. It also gives you more removal early. Turn 2 Arcanist, turn 2 Priest of the Fellrights, it's just there's a lot of plays on turn 2 you want to break up, so I usually like that. Otherwise, the creature package is fairly similar. I really like Ferocidon right now. I'm a little lighter on creatures at only 26, but I've actually really liked this Chandra 3 in the list. Gives you some grind element against the control decks, also incidental ping damage. I've ultimated it a couple times as a win con. Plays pretty well. My mana base is, I think recently I've actually switched to go down 1 castle and just up 1 regular mountain. But I don't like 4 dens just because after turn 2, they're tap lines. I want to maximize the percentage that all my lands come into play untapped. This Castle Embereth plays really nice with these dorks when you don't want to overcommit, but you still want to push through some damage. So those are kind of the variations of mono red. Like you see mine, I was actually close to almost close to a 70% win rate going in, and I'm kind of like, well, we'll take a look in a sec. I think I'm at like low 60s at this point. So then we go to blue-white control. This is Proctor control. So like I said, we're seeing more Divine Purge in the deck, which makes it a little bit trickier for these low-to-the-ground aggro decks. While you don't lose the creatures fully, it's basically a time walk for a lot of these, and then your creatures, we have haste creatures, but they come into play tapped. So this kind of buys them the turn. We're also seeing Settle come out more. Crokies was playing a list with 4 Purge, 2 Settles, 4 discontinuities. But basically with the Proctor, stops enter the battlefield effects unless your opponent plays 2. This lets you get Lotus Field into play without sacking the lands. You basically ignore your trigger and kind of go from there. So then we have Esper Reanimator. I'm actually interested to see how the new Jin-Jitaxis plays in this from Neon Destiny. I think that's a card we're definitely going to try out in these Reanimator shells. And also just kind of like a good illustration here. Like it says here, I played this deck 6 days ago, but it also says the cards I don't have. So if I want to play Reanimator, I need 3 rare wild cards and then 1 mythic, and then it'll pull up your kind of spread of wild cards. So it's a really good way to see what decks you can build and can't build. Auras kind of fluctuates. There's a couple different versions of Auras. I've seen some versions play Esper Sentinel, some play Danto Vanguard. This deck's kind of, you either run down your opponent, I find, or they just interact on every axis and you just kind of die. Enchantress, again, this is the 9 lives Solemnity Lock. It's just a prison deck that wins through Second Sun or making very large creature lands with the Destiny Spinner or the Sigil. Notably, what we're seeing here is 2 copies of Leyline in the main. This gets around all the discard decks. It gets around Dragonstorm combo. So kind of some ways around that. We also see Rest in Peace in the main board. Phoenix, we see a couple different variations. The one that's having a slightly better win rate is the non-Delver version. As a surprise to no one, Delver's been really lackluster in 2022, 2021, 2022. We're seeing just more kind of threats that aren't reliant on the graveyard. We're seeing a return to Stormwing Entity. Crackling Drake's always a good card. We're seeing some Fading Hope in the main as well. An interesting thing we're seeing in a lot of these red-based decks that are playing like Arcanist and stuff is the split between 1 Flame Blast Bolt and 3 Unholy Heat. So Unholy Heat has a higher ceiling, but my assumption is this is to hedge against the Exile, so Cat Oven, or against Phoenix in the Mirror. I think in best of 1, because the games go so quick, you're usually just try to kill them. I like the flexibility more on this, just going up to 6. Like a 1-mana answer to Teferi or just like bigger creatures seems better to me. And we see that kind of reflected in this list. Then just kind of coming down, we see Niv. Some of these lists, like we're probably going to see some additions if we see Teferi added in. And then we're just kind of going down the list where we just don't have a big enough sample size yet. This was my older version with the Chainwhirler and the 2 Chandras. I'm trying to get, because they named Rumpty's mono green list, Rumpty mono green. I'm trying to get them to name this like MTG Joe green, which would be kind of cool. So if we just open my profile for a sec, I can let you know where I'm at with mono red. I kind of fell out the end of the month. Like you could see, I was top 1200 for most of the month, and I just took a bad losing streak and then couldn't recover. I kept hitting like 1300 and then just like lose 3 or 4 in a row. I'll highlight this Arcanist deck in best of 1 in a sec. But you could see, like, I was just trying everything last month. Like humans didn't work, mono white didn't work. I tried like importing a mono red deck, didn't work. So I'm at 61% with the deck. So I played this deck a lot. I've played a lot of, what is this, version 15 of the deck. So I've played it a lot, but we see like I'm just kind of falling behind here now. I went up the line to 24 to try to help. It didn't really seem, but just went on a rough streak with the deck. We can see where like I just wasn't winning games. We were 24 and 13. I was trying Pyromancer out for a bit, but with all the Proctors in, it doesn't really help. So we've been playing around here and there with certain cards, seeing what's working, what hasn't. Being on the play certainly helps this deck. And then the deck that I've actually been enjoying this season thus far, I haven't played many games this season. I'm still Platinum 4. Rakdos Arcanist, no Lurrus. So I think I'm still on Flame Blast Bolt. I made the switch, but I haven't played any games. And I got rid of this. I think I'm still on Spikefield Hazard, but it's basically a Lurrus-less version. So you're playing your threats of 8 1-drop discards in Inquisition Thoughtseize to clear the way, ideally, for Dreadhorde Arcanist on 2. And then you have like your Go Blanks, Seasoned Pyromancers to just draw you cards late game. Also discard the Hand Hate when it's not relevant anymore. And then Sorin and Chandra on the top end. And then some copies of like Den and Hive of the Eye Tyrant. Basically the goal of this is shred your opponent's hand and then find one threat that can just keep poking in with a lot of useful removal. One card I've been see some play instead of the Magmatic Channeler is Rahilda. Just as another way to kind of get virtual card advantage off the top of your opponent's deck. So there's pros and cons. Like Rahilda's a more aggressive threat, gives you card advantage, stuff like that. Magmatic Channeler lets you filter through your deck a little bit better. Magmatic's a 1/3 versus being a 2/2. So notably, like the most common red-based removal right now is Bonecrusher Giant and Stomp. Magmatic Channeler getting around that has value. You're also seeing a lot of 2-power creatures in like Burning-Tree Emissary, stuff like that. While it does have First Strike, it kind of plays. So something I'm going to try out in the near future. I like this deck as well because you can mainboard Soul Guide Lantern to turn on Delirium, but it also helps in all these graveyard kind of style mirrors. So that's kind of it for best of 1. I like to share what I'm playing as well. I play a lot of Historic normally, so that's where my kind of feedback loop is the biggest. In best of 3, we have 26,000 matches, January 27th, Platinum Mythic. Are we actually at close to the same? Actually, that's impressive. You usually see this, like for Standard, for example, it was 100,000 versus like 20,000. So it was like 5-time multipliers, so it's like 2 times, which is interesting. So Squirrel Twin in best of 3, also the top play deck in terms of win rate. Notably, what we see in the best of 3 version is they're off of Prosperous Innkeeper instead playing the Johnny's Welcome, which is a more resilient threat against sweepers. Then they're a split of Lunarch Aspirant and Selfless Savior. And then they have the Ranger Captain of Eos, which allows you to tutor up specific answers. This also lets you kind of prevent your opponent from, say, board wiping if you can't get the combo off. Like, say you get the combo off, but your opponent has a turn they could board wipe, you can on their upkeep sack to prevent them from being able to sweep. A lot of the decks now, be mindful, they are playing Cleansing Nova on the side. So if you're on a heavy artifact deck or enchantments like 9 Lives, a lot of decks are moving to Cleansing Nova. Creature decks as well as the control decks as well are moving to a couple, like this being their sweeper of choice out of the sideboard. Phoenix, again, we're seeing very common build to the best of one. We're actually seeing a main board Narset with the increase of blue-white control kind of being prevalent. Just kind of looking at the sideboard, actually interesting, we're seeing a return to Saheeli, just a way to make tokens, gets around the graveyard hate. So kind of a mix Saheeli and Chandra. Notably, Saheeli does get picked off by Mystical Dispute, where something like Chandra 3 or Chandra 4 doesn't get hit for 1 pip. So something interesting in that avenue. We see 5-color Niv. This version doesn't seem to have... Oh, no, it does. 1 Slow It Down. It's actually interesting that they're playing Ferocidon. It's a concession to like the life gain decks, but they're generally more aggressive than you are, and you have so much removal. I would feel like between like Verse, Culling Ritual, kind of Solar Blaze, like those effects, you'd be okay, but interesting to see them play that. Deputy main board is a new inclusion, so it's usually just these edge cases. They're playing a Culling main, a Pulse main, and a Deputy main. They're back on the Teferi 5 main. Sometimes this is like Scarab God. So it's kind of these edge cases that usually change week to week with that. Niv is probably the deck that varies the most. When you could play pretty much any multicolor card you want, you're going to see like slight changes here and there. Auras, so this is like the Esper Sentinel version. Interestingly, seeing Stormchaser Drake trying to do its best Spirit Dancer impression. You have the Hushbringer, which turns off a lot of the ETB style effects, but not lands notably, so it doesn't do the same as Proctor. Just kind of different approach. Notably, we're seeing 2 Spell Pierce main, 2 Karametra's Blessing, so kind of just the interaction that plays. We're only seeing 14 enchantments versus 20 creatures, so this version seems like it's harder to kind of snowball, but a little bit more resilient, and you're probably not mulliganing for threats as like frequent. So we see Golgari Food. This is a deck that always consistently has a high win rate. If you ever want to see really good Golgari Food kind of content, check out the Nerdy Steve, Twitch streamer. He got to number 2 Mythic last month. Plays the deck a ton. And then we see Rakdos Arcanist. This is the deck I was playing. This was kind of the mention that I had. Like, we see Rahilda coming in here as a 1 of, and we're also seeing a copy of City Stalker Connoisseur. I don't love this only because it's between like 9 to 10 mainboard discard plus your K commands. This usually doesn't have much play on turn 4, and I find that Sorin, just with the lifelink token or giving you card advantage, has a much higher range in terms of utility. Then we're just seeing the sideboard with that. Again, just another copy of Niv. Like I mentioned, you see like the Scarab Gods in there. See some copies of Madness show up. Just kind of coming from there. And then surprising, Azorius Control is such a low win rate. Yet it is the deck that I've watched most of folks play on the MIQ this weekend. Jim Davis was on it, Crokies was on it, just a lot of players on it. So I think it's just a build. There's a lot of kind of takes on it. I do think like you're going to see a lot of Divine Purge coming out. And just with the abundance of creature lines, you may want to see like some Field of Ruins potentially in the mana base going forward, but interesting nonetheless. And then we're just kind of in the, like you can see how many variations of Azorius Control are out there that it's hard. Folks are on Teferi, off Teferi. We see a Jeskai Lotus Field, so it's just kind of all in that range. So if you are looking for deck lists, I will post a couple of these in the video description along with the link for Untapped if you want to get kind of tracking with Untapped, get all your stats like you see here. And as always, if you do enjoy the content, if you can, drop a like, comment, and subscribe. All are free and easy ways to help out, like I said, and it is greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching. Hope you take care and stay safe out there. Thanks.